Now, India is marching ahead as the world's fastest growing economy. It's steadfast in its journey and empowered by our enviable democratic dividend as well. Just to explore how we can accelerate our ascent to the third position in the global economic hierarchy and ensure that we yield our fullest potential, the central theme of discussion at the IEC 2024, the India Economic Conclave, is going to be India's fast track to the top three. The event is going to explore how India can accelerate its ascent to the third position in the global economic order. And ahead of that intriguing set of conversations that will unfold at the event, here on India Tonight, we are diving into that bold, ambitious question. How can India fast-track its journey to become one of the top three economies in the world? So with this rapidly evolving global landscape, the domestic challenges, which are aplenty, let's just examine what's working and what's not and how we can align policy, industry and innovation to catapult India to the global economic podium. And joining us on this discussion, two economists with their expert insights. The Chief Economist and Head of Research at Bandhan Bank, Siddhartha Sanyal, is with us, along with Independent Economist Abheek Barua. Good evening, gentlemen. Glad you could make the time for this important chat on India's economic growth. Siddhartha, first to you. Now, India is already the fifth largest economy. If you were to highlight, perhaps through top 3 pointers, if possible, what you believe is going to take India to that position where we overtake Germany and Japan in the global GDP rankings?
Well, the momentum is already there, irrespective of whatever is happening in one quarter or one particular year. Generally, it's pretty evident that it's only a matter of time that we reach a rank of 3. So possibly in the next 4 to 5 years, we are there. But having said that, it's not only a straight and simple statistics, and we should not confine our discussions to that. The bigger point is how exactly we maintain a momentum for a relatively longer period of time, because it's seen that typically, barring the experience of China, who could maintain a very high growth rate for nearly 3 to 4 decades, it's not really easy to maintain such high growth rate for year after year and decade after decade. Having said that, there are certain benefits that India enjoys. Obviously, there are a few challenges as well. But our job and the job in the hands of policymakers is possibly to ensure that how we reap those potentials, how we ensure that benefits from those potentials are realized at a relatively more, rapid pace. For example, 1 or 2 points here. I think we always talk about our fantastic demographic dividend. I think now it's time, given that we have actually reached to a certain level. I think now we need to do a little bit of deep dive into this particular aspect also. For example, in another 10 to 15 years down the line, the demography of northern India and that of southern India will be dramatically different. Northern India median age in some of the reports, as we say, that in mid of the next decade will be somewhere in the vicinity of low 30s, whereas in case of southern India, it will be around 40 years of age. So we need to see that what kind of policies we bring in. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of a proposition. My sense is that another area where we need to work a lot, and government has already initiated a lot of initiatives in that particular area, is possibly vocational training. With
Right.
the Skill India mission, etc., we have traveled a long way. But another equally important aspect here is to assign a stronger social prestige, social status to vocational training, which still seems to be somewhat lacking in India.
Yes.
And in my opinion, that can actually make a huge difference going ahead over the course of the next 5 years or 10 years or for
Yes.
even longer.
So as far as the need on the employment side is concerned, those remain acute because you also mentioned the demographic dividend, and to be able to tap that potential, we'll perhaps have to press forward. But Abhi, given the setbacks of the pandemic, which sectors do you think are going to lead the charge for India's growth? Will it be technology or manufacturing or perhaps green energy? Are we doing enough also to incentivize these industries that you think are going to drive our growth, both on the policy side and fiscal support?
There is a clear effort to pivot towards manufacturing, which, from a policy perspective, had been neglected for a very long time. And I think it's underpinned by the belief that if you need sort of mass employment and large scale employment, manufacturing is the only way forward. And I think Make in India and the other efforts, including the skilling efforts that Siddharth mentioned, are all focused to creating a larger manufacturing base and absorbing more labor into the formal manufacturing economy. So I think from a policy perspective, that's getting a lot of attention. The second, of course, is sustainable energy. And I think, in order to address that, we need to sort of look at the elephant in the room, which is the power sector, whether power is generated from conventional methods, thermal or whatever, or whether it's through more sustainable technologies, more green technologies, the pricing of power, the distribution of power, and the kind of receivables, etc., that have built up in states, and the pressure that it exerts on the fiscal situation of states has to be kind of looked into very carefully and sorted out. I mean, this has been there in the change playbook for decades, but I think we need to sort of get down to sorting that out. And I am glad Siddharth brought up the issue of differential trends in demographics, and I
Yes,
think simultaneously with a demographic dividend, we'll also, or the de-aging dividend, we also have an aging dividend, which will
yes,
come from perhaps southern India, and there are products both in the manufacturing area, in the health, in the service area like healthcare, financial services and so forth, which needs to kind of cater to this rapidly aging segments of the population, which are ironically enough concentrated in one part of the country, where the other part of the country is still relatively young.
right.
So, I mean, these are some of the challenges, but I just wanted to sort of draw your attention to the latest report on getting to this third rank, which is by S&P in October 2024. And one of the things it sort of talked about is getting our coastal strategy right. And I think this is kind of a little out of the conventional playbook, and it talks about the need for expanding trade and getting
Yes,
both our coastal infrastructure
yes.
and the sort of the geopolitics right, because we know there is sort of a huge amount of tension in the South China Sea, in the Andaman Sea, and so forth. So
Yes.
these are some of the things that I could think of.
Well, that's an important piece. Given our potential to explore trade, given our long coastline, how much have we been able to raise that potential? And that's something that is going to drive growth in times to come. But Siddhartha, inflation in the meantime is this persistent challenge. We have a new RBI governor, expectations of rate cuts running high right now as growth slackens. But in general, is the current policy mix sufficient to manage price pressures while we sustain growth?
Well, there are two aspects to it. One is the core trend in prices with relatively modest global growth, relatively. So there are certain supply bottlenecks, supply side issues, given the heightened global tension, etc. That possibly we have to deal with. But otherwise, we get to see that which we term as core inflation and all that seems to be fairly under check for a fairly long period of time. And whenever there has been spikes in the in some of the more volatile items, thankfully we have not seen so much of seeping in of those price pressures into the core inflation blocks. So to that extent, you can actually remain somewhat more hopeful about more growth supportive policies going ahead. But having said that, I think all policymakers will maintain a very prudent stance and will take into aspect all possible aspects, not only growth that they can unilaterally and unidirectionally focus on. They have to take care of their overall inflation mandate, what is happening in the external sector, how some of the geopolitical and geoeconomic challenges are impacting India. For example, in the near term, how exactly the currency behaves, what are the flows like. I think all these aspects would have to take into account. But having said that, there is a clear focus of a balanced policy mix, both from the part of government as well as from RBI. And I don't see a reason to think that will be changing. That has worked well for us. I think that will be the bedrock for policy going ahead as well.
Growth drivers is domestic consumption, Abheek, and rural consumption is just about staging this comeback, even as urban demand is showing signs of strain. So it's going to be critical to address these consumption gaps, I would imagine, as far as growth momentum and keeping that intact. But how crucial is also wage growth, Abheek? It has been subdued for years. What interventions do we need to reignite household incomes and spending power?
Right. I think that is a conundrum that I don't think anyone has a clear answer to. There are various explanations that are provided. Heavy industrial concentration, for one, the rising share of profits in GDP, which is coming at the cost of wage repression, simply because we have a very elastic labor supply curve. I think we need to sort of get to the bottom of it. And unless we have a more balanced mix of wages, profits, and other factor incomes in the economy, you will have these chronic demand problems. And the rural demand pickup, etc. These are cyclical factors. But there seems to be a long-term structural issue with consumption demand from the mid 2010s. And we need to sort of really understand what is going on there. And these are difficult things to kind of address through policy, because if you believe, and as a business channel, you should believe that firms are profit maximizing entities, and they will. It is in their interest
Yes.
to keep wage costs low. So we can't really, exhort them to raise wages or whatever. But what is the mechanism? Maybe skilling is one, raising productivity through skilling, etc. And as the sort of manufacturing engine picks up, you will have to pay higher wages to attract workers. So I think it's very complex. Siddhartha
Yes.
alluded to some of it, but
But all of
it's
it
not
is
something that we
interlinked.
can
I mean,
discuss
yes. But to raise the potential of our manufacturing, you need that demand to pick up on the domestic side. And for that, you need policy measures, both on the fiscal side, and you're looking at some of that trying to come into play on the monetary side, as well as the RBI's ask increases. But what about the competitive landscape, Siddhartha? Now, you're seeing economies like Indonesia and Brazil, they're also vying for greater global economic clout. So Indian economy has to shape up against the competition as well, and there would be strategies over there that we can pick up from. Also, these tariff wars pose a risk to India's economic ambitions. So how do we stand against, what's happening globally?
I think if you see globally in the last 5 to 10 years, we have often seen some bit of pressure in terms of slowing demand. Abheek mentioned nicely about what is happening in case of India. Also, in occasionally we have seen some bit of pressure on the demand side in case of India as well. Relatively, I would tend to say that India is still on a better platform, on a better footing compared to most peers. But given that the 2/3 of India's economy or GDP contribution typically comes from private consumption, I think we cannot take chances on that. We need to ensure that remains in good shape. And given the population dynamics, given the journey we are now going through in terms of rising aspiration, rising income, rising per capita productivity, there is enough reason to believe that with a little bit of nurturing and hand-holding, we can actually ensure very healthy long-term demand position, especially compared to rest of the world. Right. So I think that is one of our biggest potential, and policymakers need to focus on this particular aspect.
Well, yes, go ahead.
No, my sense is that I'll touch upon once more that particular area, that in terms of more well-distributed growth in the economy and employment, I think some of the areas like vocational training is very important. Yes. My sense is that the flow of resources to medium-scale industry, in case of India in particular, is very important. If I do that 5-10 year cut, it hasn't really, in terms of share, it hasn't moved much. So some of these things we may have to focus a little more. But overall, I don't think we are in.
But we have a budget 2025, which is not too far away. If you look back at the finance minister's budgets, Nirmala Sitharaman's, what she's brought to the table, Abheek, which initiatives on the fiscal side have been the most impactful, and where do you think we've fallen short in driving long-term growth? Because it was being alluded by Siddhartha as well, India's tax and subsidy framework that needs to be aligned with the needs of businesses, especially MSMEs and startups. Do you think we are doing that to become competitive globally?
I think there has been a lot of progress which has been made on the MSME side, including the delivery of credit, which has come hand in hand with formalization. But I think, one of the trade-offs, as we keep talking about the inflation growth trade-off, but even on the monetary side and where it sort of involves credit delivery, you can have, guarantees, etc., that come from government in the budget. But I think we'll have to strike a trade-off between an excessive concern for stability and and fulfilling the needs of the underbanked. Because if you get into the subprime territory, you are bound to get into riskier and riskier borrowers. And at some point, you have to kind of tell yourself that, look, I'm going to develop this market. I'm going to develop this credit market for riskier borrowers. And I'm willing for a while to take the risk of some degree of instability which stems from this, unless it is hugely systemic. I think we are a little too cautious on that, and I think we need to kind of take our risk with potential minor accidents and not get too uptight about having too clean a sort of balance sheet for the entire financial system as far as MSMEs and lower income borrowers are concerned. You just need to develop that market, and you need to bear the initial risk and the cost of developing that market.
Right. So perhaps a little more than a course correction is required on that front. It's quite clear that while India has this immense potential, the road to the top three is paved with both opportunities and there are formidable challenges. And as we look ahead now at the Times Network India Economic Conclave, that happens later this week, there will be insights that will shape all the critical conversations taking place about India's economic future. But thank you very much. A big thank you to our guests, Siddhartha Sanyal and Abheek Barua. Thank you for joining us with your perspectives on ET Now this evening.
If you like this video, then like, share and subscribe to ET Now.